Hello everyone, this is WWII, and I'd like to present the Battlefield 5 K31 vs. Real Life. Released in the summer 2020 update, the K31/43 has been something of a niche weapon since its debut in-game. It's rarely used by other players. There is also a strong argument that the rifle doesn't belong in Battlefield 5 at all, since its country of origin, Switzerland, was officially, neutral during World War II. But while it can be added to the long list of odd weapons that are technically out of place in a World War II game, is Battlefield 5's digital representation of the K31 any good? And how does it stack up to the storied Swiss bolt action? The K31 was the latest in a long line of Swiss bolt actions of the Schmidt-Rubin family of rifles, beginning with the Model 1889 at the start of the smokeless powder era. The core action was designed by Colonel Rudolf Schmidt, and its ammunition, the 7.5 by 53.5mm cartridge, was developed by Colonel Eduard Rubin. Unlike many contemporary rifles, which used a conventional turnbolt system, the Schmidt-Rubin is a straight pull design, which I'll explain a bit later in the video. Various upgrades and tweaks were applied to the design throughout the years, which eventually culminated into the K31. The lead designer for the K31 was Adolf Führer, a name that sounds uncomfortably close to this lame asshole, who ruined the Adolf party for everyone. Ah well, at least that story had a happy ending though, am I right? However, despite his unfortunate sounding name, Führer did a great job updating the 1911 carbine into what would become the K31. The most notable design changes were the shortening of the action, and the repositioning of the locking lugs from the rear to the front of the bolt, increasing its strength. Various other small tweaks would also be added to the new K31 design, and shortly after its completion, it was adopted as standard issue by the Swiss military. In the early 1940s, the Swiss experimented and fielded a couple of variants that had low magnification scopes mounted to the left side of the receiver, the K31-42 and K31-43 respectively. The K31-43 specifically is the model used in Battlefield 5. It should be noted before I go on that I only have the standard unscoped K31 variant instead of the K31-43 seen in-game, because I'm not Scrooge fucking McDuck. Mechanically, however, the two rifles are completely identical, so this won't detract from the analysis. So how exactly does the K31 work? As mentioned earlier in the video, the K31 is a straight pull design. This means that the K31's bolt only moves backward and forward, as opposed to up, back, forward, and down like turnbolt rifles from the same era. The theory behind this is that a straight pull action simplifies operation, and increases the speed at which the user can manipulate it. But how exactly does this work? Let's break down the K31's operating cycle. When the trigger is pulled, the firing pin hits the base of the cartridge, denting the primer and causing the contents inside the round to ignite, sending the bullet out of the barrel at high speed. When the user begins to open the bolt, primary extraction begins. The bolt cams about 45 degrees and a couple millimeters backwards, prying the spent case loose from the chamber. During secondary extraction, the bolt is pulled back further, extracting the case fully from the chamber, and then out of the rifle completely when the case hits the ejector. During this process, the bolt completes its rotation and cocks the firing pin. When the bolt is pushed forward, the sear is engaged, and a round is stripped from the magazine and is then pushed into the chamber. The rifle is once again ready to fire. While it's a bit more mechanically complex than a turnbolt rifle, it works quite well, and its operation is incredibly smooth. So now that we know the history of the K31 and how it operates, how does its digital representation in Battlefield 5 compare to the real thing? First, let's compare loading the rifle in reality versus in-game. The K31 is chambered for the 7.5 by 55mm Gewehrpatrone 11, also known as the GP11. It's a pretty potent cartridge, and the GP11 specifically is high-quality ammunition capable of a high degree of precision. The K31 was designed to primarily be loaded with 6-round stripper clips, but can also be loaded with single rounds. Uncommonly for the era, The magazine is actually quick detachable, similar to a modern hunting rifle, but this was only to facilitate cleaning, not to reload the gun. So how do the reload animations in Battlefield 5 compare to the real reload cycles for the K31? The real K31 used wax-coated cardboard clips. However, DICE, for whatever reason, decided to use the plastic aftermarket clips instead for the basis of the in-game animation. While historically inaccurate considering that the plastic clips were not used in World War II, the animation itself is quite excellent. One of the K31's in-game specializations is the ability to use detachable box magazines. The animation for the empty reload cycle is correct. However, the animation for the partial reload is impossible to do in real life. The player character pointlessly opens the bolt and at the same time uses his fingers to catch the live round extracted from the chamber. When he takes out the magazine, the round magically floats in thin air. In reality, the round would fall out of the magazine well because at that point there is simply nothing there to retain it. So while the in-game animations for the K31 are mostly correct, it's clear that DICE overlooked a couple of details while creating them. The in-game model itself, though, is trademark DICE artistic quality. Now, don't get me wrong, I have many misgivings about the aggressively inauthentic art style DICE decided to go for in Battlefield 5, but graphical asset quality is not one of them. The development team has done a uniformly excellent job modeling in-game weapons, and the K31 is no exception. The in-game rifle in Battlefield 5 looks stunning, with a high polygon count, texture resolution, and overall meticulous level of detail that mostly faithfully compares to the real thing, though a couple of liberties were taken modeling the sights. The real K31 has a rear U-notch tangent sight adjustable from 100 to 1,500 meters of elevation, and a front blade sight with protective ears on both sides to prevent damage in the field. In Battlefield 5, though, the K31's rear iron sight is represented as a deeper V-notch to make aiming easier. The real rifle sights are based on a 19th century understanding of ergonomics, and are somewhat hard to use by modern standards. For the K31-43 variant, the optic is a fixed 2.8 power scope that can be adjusted from 1 to 700 meters of elevation. In Battlefield 5, the 2.8 power scope is rounded up to 3 power, and there's also a specialization that increases it to a 6 power scope, which was something the Swiss never actually used for the K31. However, these small changes are total non-issues that don't appreciably detract from the Battlefield 5 experience, and are only noticed by nerds like me anyways. They certainly don't change the fact that the K31 in Battlefield 5 is the best the rifle has ever looked and will ever look in a video game. Probably ever. I rate it 9 Gary Buseys out of 11.
The conspiracy is real.
So the K31 looks good in Battlefield 5, but how do the tactics used in-game stack up to reality? During the 1815 Congress of Vienna, following the disastrous Napoleonic Wars that saw the French briefly take control of the entire country, Switzerland vowed to remain neutral in all future conflicts. It's not difficult to understand why they did this, seeing as Switzerland was a landlocked country surrounded on all sides by hostile imperialist powers, hungry for territorial conquest.
Ziggy piggy, ziggy piggy, ziggy piggy.
Of course, for neutrality to work, you need a large standing army and a strong defensive network to deter foreign invaders. In the 1880s, the Swiss came up with the National Redoubt defensive plan, which heavily fortified Switzerland's mountainous central region and provided refuge for the Swiss army in the event of a large-scale retreat. These areas would be heavily dotted with bunkers and artillery, but as with any army, the mobility of infantry was crucial to a successful defense. The mountainous terrain forced the Swiss military to focus heavily on the marksmanship of the individual riflemen. Swiss troops were expected to seek cover and fire from higher ground, using the geography of the area to their advantage. The in-game K31 definitely allows for a far more diverse and aggressive set of tactics, by virtue of Battlefield being an overall very much arcadey, gamey experience. Unlike firing a real K31, in Battlefield 5 your player character is not affected by weapon sway or fatigue in any meaningful way. Sometimes I forget the hold your breath button even exists in this game because 90% of the time it's not even necessary. In this game, you can easily make offhand headshots while constantly moving from side to side. And similar to the real K31-43, you can easily toggle between the iron sights and the scope, the latter of which makes getting kills in Battlefield 5 even easier. In this specific capacity, it could be argued that the K31-43 in Battlefield 5 is similar to the intended use of the actual rifle, as a versatile DMR, or designated marksman rifle, meant to bolster the effectiveness of a unit and/or his squad by acting as a sort of force multiplier. My preferred in-game tactic is to move deep behind enemy lines, taking out enemies and setting up spawn beacons as I go to allow my squad and team to advance. With the versatility the K31-43's optics allow, it is absolutely possible to top the scoreboard while using it, provided your aim is good and your aggression is high enough. However, in reality, the K31 is a much more difficult platform to use than Battlefield 5 portrays it as. The real rifle is front-heavy, bulky, and kicks like a fucking horse. Making precise shots using these old-school military bolt actions is kind of hard in general, much less scoring headshots at a distance. Now, don't get me wrong, the K31 was by all means a great military rifle, but at the end of the day it was a glorified 19th century design updated for the 1930s. By World War II, the United States, the Soviet Union, and Nazi Germany had all fielded more advanced self-loading infantry rifles, and as good as the K31 was, it was still a bit long in the tooth by that time. Self-loading rifles were less accurate than the K31, but allowed a far greater volume of fire and thus better suppressive capability, and the world's armies were embracing their benefits. However, for what it was, the K31 was an excellent military bolt action with an incredibly high build quality. To my knowledge, the K31 never actually saw any combat use due to Swiss neutrality in World War II. You know, neutrality. However, if Hitler and Mussolini's planned Operation Tannenbaum invasion of Switzerland had ever been attempted, I have no doubt the K31, and especially the scoped 43 variant, would have been very effective in their intended roles. But in Battlefield 5, one thing is certain. The K31-43 is a fun, effective rifle for the recon class, and a welcome if perhaps out of place addition to the player's arsenal. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. WWII signing off.